Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, May 25th, 2022. In Texas and in Washington, D.C., debate over whether stricter gun control laws are needed after yesterday a lone shooter at an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas, killed at least 19 children and 2 teachers. Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott's news conference in Uvalde interrupted by Democratic gubernatorial candidate Beto O'Rourke accusing Abbott of not doing enough to respond. In Washington, U.S. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer saying there will not be gun-related votes soon to give time for a bipartisan compromise, which Schumer says has a slim chance of success, but an effort that must be made. Plus, a Senate confirmation hearing today for President Biden's nominee to lead the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. And today, President Biden issuing an executive order on police reform on this 2-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder by a police officer in Minneapolis. FDA Commissioner today questioned by Congress on why it took the FDA so long to respond to whistleblowers' complaint about unsanitary conditions at an infant formula plant in Michigan, shutdown of which has contributed to the current nationwide shortage. And we'll hear from some winners and losers of Tuesday's campaign primaries in Georgia, races in which former President Donald Trump took sides. ABC News reports that former Congressman Beto O'Rourke, Democrat from Texas, interrupted a press conference from Texas Governor Greg Abbott about the Uvalde shooting Wednesday, shouting at the current governor before being escorted from the auditorium. He said the response from Abbott and other Texas leaders was totally predictable and did nothing to solve the problem, easy access to guns, that is plaguing communities across Texas and the nation. Abbott ordered law enforcement officers to escort O'Rourke, who was running for governor, outside the building. The article goes on. Several attendees on the stage, including Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, Republican, began yelling back, telling O'Rourke to sit down, that he was pathetic, and that this was no place for politics. Here is a bit of what it sounded like.
Governor Abbott, I have to say something.
Excuse me.
The time
Excuse me.
to have stopped this
Excuse me.
was after Santa Fe High School.
Sit down. Don't pull us stuff.
Was after El Paso.
Sit down and don't play this stuff.
The next shooting is right now, and you are doing nothing.
No,
you're offering
he
us
needs to get his
nothing.
ass out of here.
You
This
said
isn't
this
the
is not
place to talk to
predictable.
yourself.
This is totally predictable when you
Sir, you're out of line.
anything to
Sir,
save the
you are out of line. Sir, you are out of line. Please leave this auditorium.
Interruption by Beto O'Rourke, Democratic candidate for Texas governor, confronting Texas Governor Greg Abbott, Republican, who's running for re-election, a news conference in Uvalde, site of yesterday's mass shooting at the elementary school. After Beto O'Rourke was escorted out, Governor Abbott spoke.
There are family members. There are family members who are crying as we speak. There are family members whose hearts are broken. There's no words that anybody shouting can come up here and do anything to heal those broken hearts. We all, every Texan, every American has a responsibility where we need to focus not on ourselves and our agendas. We need to focus on the healing and hope that we can provide to those who have suffered unconscionable damage to their lives and loss of life. We need all Texans to, in this one moment in time, put aside personal agendas, think of somebody other than ourselves, think about the people who are hurt, and help those who have been hurt.
Governor Greg Abbott at a news conference in Uvalde, Texas today. In Washington, D.C., as NBC News puts it, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer signaled Wednesday the chamber will not quickly vote on a pair of House-passed background checks bills, giving Democrats and Republicans time to negotiate a possible but improbable bipartisan deal to address a spate of horrific mass shootings that have rocked the nation in recent weeks.
Our parents don't need to drop their kids off at school and wonder if their kid will be next. That's in the thoughts of millions of moms and dads right now. Our citizens don't have to endure the fear of getting groceries while constantly keeping an eye behind their backs. Again, millions of Americans are worried about that right now. Americans can make a choice. Americans can reject the Republican guns-at-all-costs doctrine, obeisance to the NRA, not even voting for the most simple sensitive, positive, and popular gun legislation. Americans can cast their vote in November for senators or members of Congress that reflect how he or she stands with guns, with this issue, at the top of the voters' lists. In the meantime, my Republican colleagues can work with us now. I know this is a slim prospect, very slim, all too slim. We've been burnt so many times before. But this is so important, and I have such a firm belief, taught to me by my late father who passed away in November, that if you do the right thing and persist, justice will eventually prevail. But you got to keep persisting, and we will. And for that reason alone, we must pursue action and even ask Republicans again to join us. Maybe, unlikely, burnt in the past, that their hearts might see what has happened and join us and do the right thing. They know it's the right thing. They can work with us to craft legislation that would prevent needless loss of life. It's their choice. As Majority Leader, I haven't been shy about putting bipartisan legislation on the floor for a vote. But bipartisanship means both parties must engage in crafting a bill, like happened in the House and Senate 30 years ago with the Brady Law and the assault weapons ban. Democrats have been trying to work hard with Republicans, Senator Murphy, Senator Manchin, on legislation that will eventually pass and become law. The other side has refused. There are so many options available to us, so many ideas. We just need some brave Republicans to stand athwart history and yell, "Stop."
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, on the Senate floor, referring to the filibuster. It takes 60 votes in the Senate out of 100 to move a bill forward, and the Democrats in a majority have 50 votes, with Vice President Kamala Harris as president of the Senate providing them with the majority. The story from Politico, Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut, is leading the effort to discuss a response to the horrific shooting which killed at least 19 children, 2 teachers in Texas on Tuesday. Murphy says he doesn't need votes on legislation that he knows will fail, a view shared by many Democrats. And holding a failed vote now would certainly cool any possible conversations between Republicans and Murphy, who has spoken to both Senator Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, and Pat Toomey, Republican of Pennsylvania, in the past 24 hours. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell writes CNN delivered an emotional speech on the Senate floor Wednesday following the mass shooting in a Texas school a day earlier. The top Senate Republican put the blame clearly on the shooter, whom he described as a deranged young man and maniac, echoing the views of many Republicans that mental illness is the root cause of many of these recurring tragedies. The CNN article continues, McConnell didn't make any mention of the 18-year-old shooter's easy access to high-powered weapons or any possible preventive legislative solutions.
It's literally sickening to consider the innocent young lives that were stolen by this pointless, senseless brutality. To consider the parents and families who sat waiting at the Civic Center, waiting to either be reunited with their son or their daughter, or to learn they never would be. The investigation is still underway. The authorities will continue to learn exactly what happened and how. In the meantime, we're also praying for the Border Patrol officer who, according to reports, was wounded after he responded to the scene, and for all the law enforcement, paramedics, and first responders whose dedication yesterday saved lives. Most of all, the entire nation's hearts are broken for the victims and for their families. Words simply fail. Yesterday, the Uvalde school superintendent said, quote, "We're a small community. We will need your prayers to get us through this." We pray fervently that in the midst of this nightmare of grief, our Heavenly Father will make manifest to those families His promise in Psalm 34, that the Lord is near to the brokenhearted.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, on the Senate floor today. President Biden's choice to lead ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, Stephen Dettelbach, testified at his nomination hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee today. Wall Street Journal writes it isn't clear whether Mr. Dettelbach will have a smoother path to Senate confirmation than the previous nominee who had to drop out. As a candidate for Ohio's Attorney General in 2018, he said he supported a ban on assault-style weapons and universal background checks, and some Senate Democratic caucus members remain uncommitted, including John Tester of Montana and Joe Manchin of West Virginia, also Angus King, an independent who caucuses with the Democrats. At today's hearing, Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, asking Stephen Dettelbach about his approach to law enforcement of gun laws.
You come here at a moment of extraordinary anguish, anxiety, and anger in this country. And I believe that we must move forward with gun violence prevention reforms that will make our laws more effective and give you more tools that you need in saving communities and individual lives. I believe in the Second Amendment. It's the law of the land. There are measures we can take that are consistent with the Second Amendment that will separate people from firearms if they are dangerous to themselves or others. Red flag statutes, background checks, safe storage, like Ethan's law, ghost guns bans, and others. When it comes to tackling these kinds of problems, we need an agency that is not only independent, but will be perceived as independent, beyond the influence and grip of the gun lobby, which all too often has been perceived as having undue impact on the ATF. And that perception itself can undermine an agency's effectiveness. So as much as I feel that you will bring new leadership, I think it is important that we move forward to give you that opportunity as quickly as possible, particularly seizing this moment of extraordinary challenge to make sure you have a mandate from the United States Congress to do your job. Let me ask you how you will draw on your background as a prosecutor to make sure that you're effective in this job.
Senator, I have spent the vast majority of my career as a prosecutor. Over 20 years, I've worked in, and it is a core value of mine, something that I have lived with and that I will continue, that politics can play no role in law enforcement, none at all. I worked under Republican administrations and I worked under Democratic administrations as a federal prosecutor, and I have lived that credo and I vow to continue to do it because people need to have confidence that people in law enforcement's only agenda is to enforce the law, and if you're at the ATF, to catch the bad guys and protect the public. I like to think that my record doing that is one of the reasons why I have support of over 140 senior Justice Department officials and a bipartisan support from Deputy Attorney General for Donald Trump and the Deputy Attorney General for President Bush, as well as the Deputy Attorney General for President Obama, from Assistant Attorney Generals on both sides of the aisle, and from U.S. attorneys in my state who were both appointed by President Trump and in other states. And I vow to never let politics in any way influence my action as ATF director.
Nominee Stephen Dettelbach questioned by Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal at today's Judiciary Committee confirmation hearing. Republican Senator Mike Lee of Utah began his questioning by expressing opposition to further gun control laws, and then turned to the nominee and asked about the response from gun control advocates to Monday's Texas elementary school mass shooting.
Every time one of these tragedies occurs, I think we for far too long just failed to look back at the root causes of rampage violence. Questions involving things like why is our culture suddenly producing so many young men who want to murder innocent people? Raises questions like, include things like fatherlessness, the breakdown of families, isolation from civil society, or the glorification of violence, be contributing factors. Instead, the left, once again, is calling for more gun control. They want to crack down on law-abiding Americans and federal firearms licensees who want to follow the law instead of armed criminals. For example, as I recall, Mr. Dittelbach, you've called for every type of gun control, and under your leadership as U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio, the number of prosecutions of firearms and explosives cases filed by the office actually decreased by almost half, from 123 cases filed in 2008 to only 65 cases filed in 2016. Now, there may well be reasons for that. I'm not familiar with all the operations of the office at the time, but I think it's worth inquiring into. But what's even more outrageous, though, is that gun groups like the Brady Campaign and Everytown have wasted no time in attempting to profit off of this horrific tragedy in Uvalde, Texas. Everytown's fundraising email attempts to play on the emotions of those whose lives have been ripped apart by this tragic shooting is troubling. Their email says, quote, "This crisis will only end if we band together and demand action from our lawmakers. I need you in this fight." And at the end of the letter is a large red button that says, "Contribute to end gun violence." Now, Mr. Dittelbach, you're endorsed by Everytown. Is that right?
I believe so, Senator.
Are you willing to disavow their shameless immediate fundraising off of the Texas tragedy just hours after this tragedy occurred?
Senator, as I said, and I want to repeat and promise you, as ATF Director, politics have absolutely no place in law enforcement. They have no place in an ATF Director, and I don't view this as a Democrat or Republican issue. I view it as an opportunity to try to work together to make things better.
I appreciate that, and that's as it should be. Do you disavow these efforts?
Senator, I haven't seen what you're referring to, and it's not for me to get involved in a political argument. I am going to be a law enforcement person again, as I've done for 20 years, if I'm fortunate enough to be confirmed. And I vow I would never be involved in any political aspect of that kind of thing while I'm ATF Director.
No, I appreciate that, and that's as it should be. I do think it's unfortunate that they're doing this literally hours after the shooting, and I don't think that's too difficult to disavow, but apparently you're not inclined to do that.
Senator Mike Lee, Republican from Utah, and ATF Director nominee Stephen Dettelbach at today's Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. ATF has not had a Senate-confirmed director since 2015. An acting director now leads the Bureau. Dettelbach is President Biden's second choice for ATF director. His first, David Chipman, withdrew his nomination after it was clear he did not have enough Senate votes for confirmation. FBI Director Christopher Wray offering his thoughts on the mass shooting at the Texas elementary school and how his agency is assisting the investigation. Director Wray testifying today before the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee overseeing the FBI budget.
Parents got calls yesterday that are too devastating to even fathom, and a community, really a whole nation, was shaken by another horrific mass shooting, this time, once again, at an elementary school full of young kids just days away from finishing their school year. And my heart goes out to the families of the victims and to the entire community of Uvalde. I know that you're experiencing unimaginable pain and trauma, and the entire FBI family feels your heartbreak and stands with you. There will certainly be more that we're going to learn about this heinous attack in the days ahead, and I know the American people, and especially the people of Uvalde, are looking for answers. I do want to acknowledge the heroism of all law enforcement who responded immediately to the scene. For our part, the FBI will continue to work around the clock with the Texas Department of Public Safety and the Uvalde Police Department and our other state, local, and federal partners to assist in any way we can. We are dedicating the full resources of the FBI's San Antonio field office and a whole host of other FBI divisions to helping the Texas DPS and the Uvalde police who have the lead in the investigation. On top of that, we're devoting significant national resources, including investigative and analytical resources, evidence response and laboratory personnel, victim services professionals to assist the families of the victims, crisis management and behavioral analysis units.
The FBI Director Christopher Wray testifying before a Senate Appropriations Subcommittee. It was mostly a budget hearing looking at the FBI's budget. Christopher Wray also saying that the shooting in Texas at the elementary school yesterday and the one just over a week ago at the supermarket in Buffalo, he says that it reinforces what we at the FBI have been so concerned about for so long, and that is the threat of lone actors. It's the threat that we continue to be most concerned about here in the homeland. President Joe Biden coming back from a trip to Asia last night and speaking about the Texas shooting at the White House today, before issuing an executive order dealing with police reform, he again spoke about the response that he believes should be made to the shooting dealing with new gun control laws, and also confirmed that he'll be heading to Texas soon.
Since I spoke last night, the confirmed death toll has tragically climbed, including another teacher and three more students. Jill and I will be traveling to Texas in the coming days to meet with the families and let them know we have a sense of their pain, and hopefully bring some little comfort to the community in shock, in grief, and in trauma. As a nation, I think we all must be there for them, everyone. And we must ask, when in God's name will we do what needs to be done to, if not completely stop, fundamentally change the amount of the carnage that goes on in this country? To state the obvious, and Corey and a lot of other people here, I'm sick and tired. I'm just sick and tired of what's going on and continues to go on. I spent my career as chairman of the Judiciary Committee and as vice president working for common sense gun reforms. As I said, as a senator and a vice president. While they clearly will not prevent every tragedy, we know certain ones will have significant impact and have no negative impact on the Second Amendment.
President Joe Biden in the White House East Room. It was the start of his remarks today, an event originally called because today is the 2-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer, and the president signing an executive order on police reform. This as police reform legislation in the U.S. Senate has stalled amid disagreements between Republicans and Democrats. The president saying today's order covers a variety of topics: use of force guidelines, chokeholds, no-knock warrants, creating a national list of officers disciplined for misconduct, and scaling back transfers of military equipment to police departments.
First, the executive order promotes accountability. It creates a new national law enforcement accountability database to track records of misconduct so that an officer can't hide the misconduct. It strengthens the pattern and practice investigations to address systematic misconduct in some departments. It mandates all federal agents wear and activate body cameras while on patrol. Second, the executive order raises standards, bans chokeholds, restricts no-knock warrants, tightens use of force policies to emphasize de-escalation and duty to intervene to stop another officer from using executive force, just as occurred. That didn't occur, but people testified it didn't occur in George Floyd's case. And third, the executive order modernizes policing. It calls for a fresh approach to recruit, train, promote, and retrain law enforcement that's tied to advancing public safety and public trust. Right now, we don't systematically collect data, for instance, on instances of police use of force. This executive order is going to improve that data collection. There's a lot more as well. The bottom line of the executive order includes reforms that have long been talked about or finally implemented at a federal level. and it comes at a critical time. By building trust, we can strengthen public safety, and we can more effectively fight crime in our communities. And we can do one more thing. We can show what's possible when we work together. Look, I know progress can be slow and frustrating. And there is a concern that the reckoning on race inspired 2 years ago is beginning to fade. But acting today, we're showing that our dear friend, the late John Lewis, Congressman, wrote in his final words after his final march for justice in July of 2020. He said, "Democracy is not a state. It is an act. Democracy is not a state. It's an act, an affirmative act." And today we're acting. We're showing that speaking out matters, being engaged matters, and that the work of our time, healing the soul of this nation, is ongoing and unfinished and requires all of us never to give up.
President Biden at the White House in the East Room, 2-year anniversary of the death of George Floyd, signing an executive order on police reform. This is Washington Today. State Department Special Envoy for Iran, Robert Malley, telling the Senate Foreign Relations Committee the prospects of talks with Iran over the U.S. rejoining that nuclear deal are at best tenuous. Washington Post explains more than a year after the talks started, with the U.S. negotiating indirectly with Iran through the 3 European parties to the original 2015 deal, Britain, Germany, and France, most issues have been settled. But negotiations stopped short of the finish line, according to U.S. and European officials, when Iran demanded that the U.S. also lift its designation of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a branch of the Iranian military, as a foreign terrorist organization. That from the Washington Post. Here is Special Envoy Robert Malley at today's hearing.
Under the JCPOA, Iran operated a tightly constrained and monitored nuclear program. It would have taken Iran about a year to make enough fissile material for a bomb, which would have given us and our allies the ability to know what Iran was doing and the time to act, should Iran make that fateful decision. Without those constraints, Iran has been accumulating sufficient enriched uranium and made sufficient technological advances to leave the breakout time as short as a matter of weeks, which means Iran could potentially produce enough fuel for a bomb before we can know it, let alone stop it. Worse, rather than compelling Iran to make concessions, the prior administration's so-called maximum pressure campaign resulted in Iran's maximum non-nuclear provocations. These included increasingly brazen attacks by Iran and the armed groups it supports against our Gulf partners and our own forces, leading to a 400% increase in attacks by Iran-backed militia between 2019 and 20. In this context, it is hardly surprising that a preponderance of former Israeli security officials, including 2 more just today, has stated unequivocally that the U.S. decision to leave the deal was among the most damaging to Israel's safety. These are hardened security professionals from across the political spectrum, all of whom would do whatever necessary to defend their country. That's why we will seek a return to the JCPOA as long as we assess that its non-proliferation benefits are worth the sanctions lifting we would provide. And we will submit this deal for congressional review pursuant to an hour were we to reach it. Of course, as I speak to you, we do not have a deal, and prospects for reaching one are tenuous at best. If Iran maintains demands that go beyond the scope of the JCPOA, we will continue to reject them, and there will be no deal. It is not our preference, but we are fully prepared to live with and confront that reality if that is Iran's choice. We have no illusion. Nuclear deal or no nuclear deal, this Iranian government will remain a threat. As we have throughout the negotiations, we will continue to strongly push back.
Robert Malley, State Department Special Envoy for Iran, testifying before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. JCPOA is the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the official name of what is commonly known as the Iran nuclear deal from 2015. The Senate committee's ranking Republican Jim Risch of Idaho saying today that deal was bad then, and it is bad now.
Here we go again. The administration has argued that Iran is galloping towards a nuclear device, and we're left with no choice of the choice of the JCPOA or an unconstrained Iranian regime. This is a false choice. It remains that the JCPOA was fatally flawed in 2015 and it is fatally flawed today. The JCPOA fails to adequately contain the Iranian regime and safeguard American national security interests. We're all familiar with the deal's sunsets. The conventional weapons embargo has already expired. The deal's ban on ballistic missiles expires next year. The entire deal remains bound by a termination day in 2025, where the UN Security Council ends consideration of Iranian nuclear matters and the resolution's snapback mechanism ceases. Iran's nuclear program is only one aspect of its malign behavior, though, as the chairman so adequately pointed out. Over the past 4 decades, the Iranian regime has murdered its own citizens, murdered Americans, made hostage-taking a central tenet in its foreign policy, exported terrorism on a global scale, and represents the principal threat to stability in the Middle East. Despite promises of, quote, longer and stronger, which we were all made in this room and made individually to each of us at the beginning of this administration, it's clear that that was a bumper sticker only, which I believed and said at the time. The current approach does not address Iran's regional terrorism, ballistic missile activity, ongoing Iranian threats to former U.S. officials, or returning American hostages to their loved ones. In fact, sanctions relief fuel Iran's terror proxies.
Senator Jim Risch is ranking Republican on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee at today's hearing. You can find this full hearing and everything you hear on the C-SPAN networks at our video library at cspan.org. Washington Today continues in a moment.
You can find C-SPAN Radio anytime on your smart speaker. Listen to the Washington Journal daily at 7 a.m. Eastern Time. Important hearings and events throughout the day.
Thank you again, and this committee will stand adjourned.
And weekdays at 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern, listen to Washington Today, a fast-paced report on the stories of the day. Listen anytime. Just tell your smart speaker to play C-SPAN Radio.
And welcome back to Washington Today for Wednesday, March 25th, 2022. It is available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. A second shipment of baby formula, 100,000 pounds, arriving today at Dulles International Airport in Virginia from Ramstein Air Base in Germany, was greeted by the U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy and First Lady Jill Biden.
I'm here today to say to parents, you aren't alone. At the highest levels of Joe's administration, he and his team understand what you're going through, and they are finding solutions. And they won't stop until all parents can get the formula all their children need.
First Lady Jill Biden at Dulles International Airport. Operation Fly Formula is the FDA-authorized program run by the Pentagon to bring in foreign-made formula to the U.S. to fill the shortage now in this country. Associated Press writes the head of the Food and Drug Administration faced bipartisan fury from House lawmakers Wednesday over months of delays investigating problems at the nation's largest baby formula plant that prompted an ongoing shortage. The shortage mostly stems from Abbott's Michigan plant, which the FDA shut down in February due to contamination issues. The FDA Commissioner is Dr. Robert Califf. Here are questions from Congresswoman Diana DeGette, Democrat from Colorado, chair of the Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations.
By my account, it took about 4 months from when the agency first became aware of these reported cases of Chronobacter to inspect the Sturgis plant. Then it took 2 more weeks for Abbott to stop production. And then it took 3 months more for FDA and Abbott to enter into a consent decree. Does that sound about right to you in terms of the time frame?
I think you've got it right. As you know, it's all documented in your in the testimony in great detail.
Yeah, so what all of us are really concerned about, obviously, and the parents of America are concerned about, it could be up to a year between the first inspection in September last year and full production at this plant. And at the same time, the vulnerable infants and children are not getting their formula. So I guess you referred to this, that you have somebody looking into it. Do you have any idea why it took so long from the report to the inspection and recall? And what's the plan to shorten the time in the future?
Well, first of all, let me say you're right to be concerned, and the public should be concerned. As I've said already, it was too slow, and there were decisions that were suboptimal along the way. And I'm sure you also know that as I was going through confirmation, I got many calls from people concerned about the food side of the FDA because of the lack of resources and concerns about the organizational structure. My basic plan has been to get through this crisis, and then we will be looking at the overall food program from the perspective of reforming it, but not waiting to deal with the specifics of this case. This is where Dr. Solomon, who's a truth teller in the FDA and well known by everyone, will lead an effort to help us get the processes corrected. I could,
Yeah.
you mentioned many items. I could go through each one if you wish. But
We don't have time, unfortunately, but what I do want to say is that I've been on this subcommittee for several decades now, and the food program at the FDA it crops up time to time. We had the peanut butter crisis. We've had many crises over the years, and we always rush to make that plant safe, clean it up. But ultimately, what we have to do is we have to work together. And I think you agree with this, to put food back into Food and Drug Administration. We have to not just throw money at it. We have to figure out what we need to do to make these inspections robust and then to shorten the time. Would you agree with that?
I 100% agree and applaud you for what you did with 21st Century Cures on the medical product side. We need the equivalent on the food side. I think the medical product side is doing really well at this point. The food side needs a similar shot in the arm.
Dr. Robert Califf is the FDA Commissioner, questioned by Congresswoman Diana DeGette, Democrat from Colorado, chair of the Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations, holding today's hearing. There was a second panel at the hearing, included the heads of major infant formula manufacturers, and also included apologies for the shortages.
My name is Chris Calamari, and I lead Abbott's U.S. nutrition business. The current infant formula shortage is heartbreaking. On behalf of everyone at Abbott, I want to express our extraordinary disappointment about the shortage. We are deeply sorry. And we are committed to ensuring that this never happens again. Safety comes first, and the recall and shutdown were necessary steps to ensure that our formula supply was safe. But both steps have worsened the current shortage. It will take more time, but we want to assure you that we are doing everything we can to get more supply onto shelves for families.
Part of today's House subcommittee hearing, there were also executives from baby formula makers Gerber and Reckitt testifying. C-SPAN covered it all. Find the full video of the hearing at our website, cspan.org. Wall Street today, the Dow up 191, NASDAQ up 170, S&P up 37. CNN's Chris Cillizza writes, there are no two ways of analyzing what happened Tuesday in Georgia. Donald Trump lost bigly. Since the 2020 election, the former president has been fixated on his loss in the state and two Republican politicians who he blamed for that defeat, Governor Brian Kemp and Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. Trump personally recruited primary challengers to both men and loudly and repeatedly proclaimed that he would help defeat them. It didn't work out that way. That was from CNN. Well, Brian Kemp won his primary on Tuesday over David Perdue, 76% to 22%. Brad Raffensperger beat Jody Heiss 52 to 33 by going over 50%. He avoided a runoff. Here are some of Tuesday night's speeches. First, David Perdue conceding.
It looks pretty obvious right now. I just called the governor, and I congratulate him. And I want you to do the same thing. Right now, what we've got to do is face the reality that Bonnie and I made a decision when we decided to do this, that we trusted the people of Georgia. And we prayed a lot about it, and we thought about not doing this. I tried not to do it. And honestly, there's a reason why we, I think, did it, or had to do it. But here's the bottom line. We trust the people of Georgia, and we did it knowing that we were going up against an incumbent governor. And, everything I said about Brian Kemp was true, but here's the other thing I said was true. He is a much better choice than Stacey Abrams. And so we are going to get behind our governor. Bonnie, I committed to him right now what Jack Kingston committed to me back in 2014. and that there's nothing they can ask me to do that I won't do. We're going to do everything we can to make damn sure Stacey Abrams doesn't take over the state and let the woke mob take over our beloved children and grandchildren. So I want you to know tonight that I am fully supporting Brian Kemp in his run to beat Stacey Abrams. He's a fellow Republican, and I'm going to tell you the failed Democrat platform right now is so obvious on the federal level, we don't want it to come to Georgia. And this is what I'm telling you tonight. It's emotional for all of us. We're disappointed, I get that. Let's take a few hours, lick our wounds, and tomorrow morning, you're going to hear me going to work for Brian Kemp to make damn sure that Stacey Abrams is never governor of Georgia.
David Perdue Tuesday night is a former U.S. Senator. His concession speech as he lost the Georgia Republican primary for governor against the incumbent, Brian Kemp. Here's what Brian Kemp said at his victory party.
Even in the middle of a tough primary, conservatives across our state didn't listen to the noise. They didn't get distracted. They knew our record of fighting and winning for hardworking Georgians. And tonight, because of your support, Georgia Republicans went to the ballot box and overwhelmingly endorsed 4 more years of our vision for this great state. That's right. Thank you. I want to take just a minute, and I want to thank my opponents for the spirited debate that we had throughout this campaign. And I want to also thank David Perdue for the nice phone call that he gave me just a little while ago, pledging his full support to make sure that Stacey Abrams is never our governor.
Georgia Governor Brian Kemp Tuesday night. He will face the Democratic Party nominee, Stacey Abrams, in the November general election. She ran unopposed in Tuesday's Democratic primary. Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger also speaking to reporters after his Tuesday night Republican primary victory.
Tonight is a come from behind victory celebration. You know, I was writing this little talk out, my little short speech here, but a year ago the political pundits on both sides of the aisle said I had a 10% support and it was hopeless. But internally I talked to my team and we joked about it, and we even sometimes had that gallows humor. If you remember that movie with Jim Carrey, where it had 10%, he says, but you say you got a chance. And I seriously did think that we had a chance, because when I really thought about it and dug deep and thought about the situation where we were, in my heart of hearts, I didn't think that the experts were really looking at this the right way. My thinking was the vast majority of Georgians are looking for honest people for elected office. Someone who would do their job, follow the law, and look out for them regardless of the personal cost to do so. I think people are tired of the arguing and bickering, and they're tired of the incompetence, particularly what goes on in Washington, D.C. Aren't we all ready for a new direction? A direction that we first look upward so we can move forward.
Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, now Republican candidate for another term after his primary victory Tuesday night. Some news from the United Kingdom. From Reuters, a humbled Boris Johnson said he took full responsibility but would not quit after a damning official report on Wednesday detailed a series of illegal lockdown parties at the British leader's Downing Street office. Johnson has faced repeated calls to resign from opposition politicians and some in his own party over the alcohol-fueled gatherings after it was revealed that he and officials had broken COVID-19 rules that all but banned people from socializing outside their households, reporting from Reuters. The Prime Minister speaking to the House of Commons today in London, beginning with another apology.
I'm grateful to Sue Gray for her report today, and I want to thank her for the work that she's done. I also thank the Metropolitan Police for completing their investigation, and I want to begin today by renewing my apology to the House, to the whole country, for the short lunchtime gathering on the 19th of June 2020 in the Cabinet Room, during which I stood at my place at the Cabinet table and for which I received a fixed penalty notice. And I also want to say, Mr. Speaker, above all, that I take full responsibility for everything that took place on my watch. Sue Gray's report has emphasised that it is up to the political leadership in Number 10 to take ultimate responsibility, and of course I do.
The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. More from the Reuters story. They write Johnson had initially denied there had been parties or rule-breaking at Downing Street, and some lawmakers say his position is untenable if he is found to have lied to Parliament, a matter under investigation by the Committee of Privileges. Prime Minister Johnson today saying he did not deliberately mislead in his earlier statements.
I'm happy to set on the record now that when I came to this House and said in all sincerity that the rules and guidance have been followed at all times, it was what I believed to be true. It was certainly the case when I was present at gatherings to wish staff farewell, and the House will note that my attendance at these moments, brief as it was, has not been found to be outside the rules. But clearly this was not the case for some of those gatherings after I had left, and at other gatherings when I was not even in the building. So I would like to correct the record, to take this opportunity, not in any sense to absolve myself of responsibility, which I take and have always taken, but simply to explain why I spoke as I did in this House. Mr. Speaker, in response to her interim report, Sue Gray acknowledges that very significant changes have already been enacted. She writes, and I quote, "I am pleased that progress is being made in addressing the issues I raised." And she adds, "Since my update, there have been changes to the organisation and management of Downing Street and the Cabinet Office with the aim of creating clearer lines of leadership and accountability, and now these need the chance and time to bed in."
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, leader of the majority Conservative Party, today before the House of Commons, referring to the Sue Gray report. She's a civil servant who did the investigation of the breaches during the COVID-19 and those parties at Downing Street. The opposition leader in Britain is Keir Starmer. He is from the Labour Party. Today, in the House of Commons, he again called on Prime Minister Johnson to resign or members of Johnson's party to remove him from power.
I've been clear what leadership looks like. I haven't broken any rules, and any attempt to compare a perfectly legal takeaway while working to this catalogue of criminality looks even more ridiculous today. But, Mr. Speaker, if the police decide otherwise, I will do the decent thing and step down. The public need to know that not all politicians are the same. That not all politicians put themselves above their country. That honesty, integrity and accountability matter. Members on the opposite benches now also need to show leadership. This Prime Minister is steering the country in the wrong direction. They can hide in the back seat, eyes covered, praying for a miracle, or they can act. Stop this out of touch, out of control Prime Minister from driving Britain towards disaster. We waited for the Sue Gray report. The country can't wait any longer. The values symbolised by the door of Number 10 must be restored. Members opposite must finally do their bit. They must tell the current inhabitant, their leader, that this has gone on too long. The game is up. You cannot be a lawmaker and a lawbreaker. And it's time to pack his bags.
The British Labour Party leader, current opposition leader Keir Starmer in the House of Commons. At the beginning of his remarks, he did make reference to an investigation that he is under for alleged rule-breaking during the COVID-19 lockdown. At the Guardian newspaper in Great Britain, there's this. 2/3 of people believe Boris Johnson should resign, given the findings from Sue Gray's report into Partygate, according to a Snap poll from Savanta Conres. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. For more of Washington's top stories sent to you every day, subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word. You can sign up at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.